Welcome back to the Aces Let's Do It podcast. I've got Evan Bruner back with me in the studio, and I am your host, Dominic Archer. And this week we're talking about the college football rankings. Not a lot of movement in the top 10. The top 7 didn't move at all, but some interesting things that happened in the top 10. MSU, or Michigan State's coach, Mel Tucker, got offered, I don't know if he's accepted it yet or not, a 10-year, $95 million contract for basically 1 year of really good play. I wouldn't have done it, but the boosters seem like this is their guy.
Well, I think the thing you have to think about whenever you're talking about paying a coach and extending him, it's not just about how good of a coach he is, but how valuable he is to your respective program. And so there was a year where Kirk Ferentz for Iowa was top 5 and highest paid coaches. No one would have ever argued he was a top 5 coach, that he was a better coach than Nick Saban or anything like that. But he was so valuable to Iowa. Iowa felt like we need to pay him this kind of money because otherwise he can go elsewhere. He had some NFL opportunities, could maybe go to a better school. And so there are some rumors, and just rumors, but apparently Michigan State doesn't take them very lightly that LSU is interested in Mel Tucker. And so I think they look at it and say, LSU is a more appealing job. Let's just be honest.
Yeah, and I saw something that Michigan State, they were the reasoning for this is that they had Nick Saban, and he left for LSU.
And I think that's exactly how you put it. You know, if you have a great coach, I think you have to do everything you can to keep him. And is this a little bit aggressive? Is it a little premature giving him after one season that kind of money? Yes, it is. But I think you would say, like, the risk reward from this, you risk losing a great coach, but on the other hand, you could risk overpaying a coach. But I think, you know, I think it's much easier to live with giving a coach more money than you should have given him. And $95 million, I guess it's a little bit harder to live with. But then to the opposite of you didn't give him everything you could and he left. And so he still, who knows, he could still go to LSU. He could still go to one of these other schools if he wants to, because if you're talking about building a dynasty, winning national championships, LSU is certainly a better position. But Michigan State can at least kind of live with it and sleep at night saying we did everything we could to keep him.
Yeah, and they're going to have a big test this week. They play Ohio State. I think they come in as number 4, if I'm not mistaken, in the
Ohio State 4, Michigan State 7 right now.
So it'll be a top 10 matchup, and this is basically a preview of who will go to the Big Ten championship.
Yeah, and I guess I was thinking maybe they could wait till after that game. If he's getting offered $95 million now, you beat Ohio State, then that might be over $100 million. I don't even know, but yeah, that's probably the most important game we've seen in the Big Ten this year. We thought it would be Penn State, Iowa potentially in early October, but that hasn't really worked out for either team. And I think for Ohio State, this is a chance because this is the first real premier team they've played since they lost to Oregon early in the season. And so they've been blowing out Maryland's and the Indianas. They played a pretty close game with Nebraska. So this is a big opportunity for them to show the committee that, you know, that one loss didn't define them. And if they can go out there and beat Michigan State by multiple scores, they're favored by 19, which is a lot when you think about it. But if they can go out there and really dominate, I think it will just kind of establish the fact that they are by far the best team in the Big Ten.
Absolutely. And, you know, this top 10 in the college football playoff ranking is very interesting because they have a website that you can go to, and it's the College Football Playoff Predictor. And a hot team for debate has been Cincinnati. Is Cincinnati a top 4 team in the country? When you go take a look at that playoff predictor, Notre Dame has a 1% higher chance of making the college football playoff as it stands right now than Cincinnati. Obviously, the big storyline there is Cincinnati had beat Notre Dame earlier in the year and did it pretty convincingly. And you and I have talked about this off air, but I personally think that if Notre Dame wins out, they will get a spot in the college football playoff ahead of Cincinnati.
I just have a lot of trouble believing that. I know we've talked about the committee's been very hard on Group of 5 schools, and so Notre Dame, they're a blue blood, they're a very prestigious program. You know, could I see them getting a favorable treatment? Maybe a little bit, but I think what makes this different from the Michigan State situation where Michigan State beats Michigan and they're still a spot below them is that Michigan and Michigan State at least have identical records. Cincinnati, if they win out, they will have a better record than Notre Dame. They will also be a conference champion, which since Notre Dame is an independent, they can't be. So they would have had the head-to-head victory. They would have a better record and their best win. So if Notre Dame beat Bama or they beat a top 5 team, you could argue with that. But I don't know. I don't believe Notre Dame's strength of schedule is significantly better than Cincinnati. So it would be a very hard argument to make. And it would be, and I try to defend the committee because I think their job is just so difficult. And I think some of these teams are just so close to one another. These rankings can become interchangeable. If they put Notre Dame over Cincinnati, I will lose my mind.
There will be riots, and there's been a lot of conversation of expanding the playoff, right? The 14 playoff has definitely been an improvement over the BCS system. The BCS system, it was fun while it lasted, but it needed to change, and bringing in this new format did a lot good for the college football playoff. It gave teams like Clemson and a couple of these other not quite great teams, but it gave them an opportunity to come in and really show their stuff. And we saw Clemson go for a really good run there for a couple of years. One of the things that I've been interested in is whether or not they will go to an 8-team playoff or a little bit more, because there's been a lot of talk about a 12-team, potentially a 16-team. And when I feel like you get to that point, you might as well just have a playoff bracket. And I'm not a big fan. I like the 4-team, but I think 6 or 8 is as big as you can go.
Yeah, I agree with you. And you also have to think about the time sensitivity of playing football. When you're playing basketball, and this is why the NCAA March Madness tournament is able to work the way it is, you can play 2 games in 3 days. You can't do that in football, and a lot of times you give them more than a week off. I can't remember. I think it's like around 12 days between the first game for the semifinal and the championship game. If you start doing 16 teams, now we're talking about this taking 4 to 5 weeks, and so you're going into late January then. And so I don't know, especially with the draft being in April, that's also something that players would have to take into account. So I would agree. I think 6 to 8 would be good. I think that you should always be looking for improvement, and I don't believe there are many people who are fully satisfied with the 4-team system. Most people would say that they would like to see more. Between 6 or 8, I don't have much of a preference. I guess we just have to wait and see. I think one of the reasons I might be a little bit more in favor of 6 is that we've seen a big gap between even the 1 and 4 team in the country in some seasons. If you do 1 versus 8, right now the number 8 team is number 8 team is Notre Dame. Number 1 team is Georgia. I think Georgia wins that. Like, I don't even know if that would be a super competitive game. And so that would be the thing and that's why, I would never really want a 16-team playoff, because, right now, if we're talking 16, you have Georgia playing Texas A&M, which A&M is not a bad team. Then you have, Wisconsin at 15 playing Alabama. That's not going to be a close game. And so I think that thing is limiting. So being able to add teams but still keeping the competitive nature of the plan.
Because, when you add more teams, especially in football, you kind of take away from winning a conference championship, being this great team, because as it stands right now, Wisconsin is the leader in their division for the Big Ten, but Michigan State has no shot basically at getting to the Big Ten title team or Big Ten title game unless they beat Ohio State. And let's be honest, I've had a tough time doing that for the last 5 or 6 years, and they would get in. But taking away the perseverance of going through a tough season, winning a conference championship, and being really a good team, would a 16-team playoff rather would take away from the specialty of that, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is we'd have to talk about, if you get to 16 teams, we'd have to start doing automatic bids as well, I think, because, with again, I keep bringing it back to the basketball tournament, which I know is completely different, but when you're going to have that many more teams, I think you should have, all of the Power Fives. That champion should automatically get in, and then we could have a couple group of 5 spots, which that would be a nice thing for it. But I just think that what makes this tournament, I think you said it best, what makes this playoff so special is it's very exclusive. You have to be a top 4 team. Your margin for error is so small. When you expand it to 16 teams, we'll see some 3-loss teams, even maybe a 4-loss team get in.
Yeah, and they've made a big deal about the first out. When they come out with these rankings, they have the top 4, and then below that they have the 2 teams, the first out. And I remember the first year of this playoff, TCU and Baylor were the first 2 teams out, and I thought they were better than Florida State, and we obviously saw Florida State get blown out by Oregon in the inaugural college football playoff. So I think the way that I would like it, I love the 6-team playoff bracket where you have basically 2 wild card teams, and then the winners of those 2 would go off and face the 1 and 2, and the 1 and 2 get a bye, which gives you incentive for winning your conference, being undefeated, being the best team in the country, and it gives more reverence to being the number 1 team in the country.
The only thing I would say with the bye, I'm not necessarily opposed to it, but one of the reasons I'm not as big on it is the big incentive for the bye is it gives you extra rest. And since there are already a few weeks in between when the 4 playoff teams are announced and the playoff actually taking place, for a 16 playoff, if the difference between getting 3 weeks of rest compared to 4 weeks or 5 weeks, I don't know if that is that much of a difference. So that would be the interesting thing to see. But I still think at the end of the day, if you're guaranteed a spot in the semifinals, that is an advantage over a team that does have to play.
Yeah, and I think you would have to shorten the downtime, right? We see a long time between the conference championship and the playoff. I think it's around like 3 weeks or something like that. You could shorten that down to 2 weeks because, as a guy who played football for so long, when you get on a roll, you don't want to stop. You don't want to take a 3-week layoff and then come back into game rest. You want to take, get your 5 days of rest and then go back in the game. And so when you take 3 weeks, that's a lot of time to have a potential injury. You're running sprints and whatnot. You pull a hamstring or you do something, turf toe. I just don't like it. I mean, obviously as a fan, I want to watch as much football as I can, and having a 3-week hiatus isn't fun. But I think you can shorten the downtime between conference championship and when the playoff starts.
And I think it's gonna, that's one thing that a lot of teams struggle with is finding the fine line between rest and rust. Because we've seen this even in the NFL playoffs where there are teams who will sit their players before their bye week, and so they'll get a double bye. There are other teams that want them to play week 17. I guess now it's week 18 because 17-game season. But that's another thing is that, for these, especially for these college kids, you really want to have a game right there. You want to keep them focused. And I think they'll have to move the games up because if they're going to add more games, they're going to add more weeks. So then they don't want to be competing with the NFL playoff schedule. So they'd still probably want to finish up around early, mid-January.
Yeah, and you talked about it earlier that the NFL draft is in April, but the combine is in February. So if you're playing into January, mid-January, you're not going to be rested up. Those guys, let's say LSU doesn't have a particularly good season, and they have a wide receiver that's really good. He's going to have more time to prepare to the combine, get better draft positioning because he has a better, he's got more time to prepare. And we've seen players such as Christian McCaffrey, Royce Freeman opt out of bowl games. And I feel like if you extend the season longer, you're going to see a ton of that. And that loses a lot of money for the college football playoff because we want to see the premier players play in the premier games. And if you're extending the season, they realize that I'm going to make millions of dollars in the NFL. I'd rather not play this game and focus on the combine.
And I think that's what makes it so interesting. I think on paper it's easy to say we need more teams, but when you go through the logistics of it, I don't know if there's a perfect answer. And so I think looking at it, we want more teams, but figuring out how they're going to put that in, I agree. I think it's it's going to take a while, and that's why I don't believe we'll see an expansion for probably for the expansion to actually be put into place, for them to have a 6 or 18 playoff happen. I think it will probably be 5-6 years from now.
Yeah, people are saying that it's going to happen this year, like they should do it this year. Well, they're too deep into this year.
Yeah,
and it's not. I don't know. I just don't like that idea. Speaking of being too late to the party, it's Oklahoma. Oklahoma has been late numerous times in the college football playoff, but this year they just haven't been able to really find their stride. They've played 2 quarterbacks basically all season, and now I don't even know who's going to start for them coming up this weekend.
Yeah, Oklahoma was one of those teams that came into the year with a lot of hype, partly because of their quarterback. I think most people thought Spencer Rattler would take a big jump. And they haven't looked the part throughout the entire season, and you kept waiting for them to give you that moment because over the years in the playoff era, they've been a consistent, very good team. And so you kept waiting, and it never happened. They almost lost to Tulane. They had a close call against Kansas. They almost lost to Texas, which is looking like a worse and worse win by the week. And I think specifically look at the quarterback situation. I'm more disappointed in Spencer Rattler because he came into the year with such high expectations. He's a third-year player, redshirt sophomore, but second-year starter, third year with the team. Caleb Williams is a true freshman. He's going to have more of his ups and downs. I'm also a little bit disappointed in Lincoln Riley when he keeps flip-flopping his guys. I just don't think that that's how you handle it because it makes it very hard on the quarterbacks. It's hard to play loose when you know that, if I have a bad drive here, I could be benched. I think you really need to stick with a guy. And that bothered me. I don't think you can do this thing where every time you get down in a game, you think about going to the backup. It just 2 quarterback systems don't really work. And I think Caleb Williams is their guy. The offense looked better when he first came in. He's also 2 years younger, so there's a better chance of seeing significant growth from him. But it's just been disappointing because I really thought Oklahoma could run the table this year.
Especially in a conference in which, we thought was going to be pretty bad. It's actually turned out to be, I wouldn't say one of the better ones, but they have Baylor in the top 15. Oklahoma State's been making a lot of noise.
Top 10, I think.
Top 10. And now, Oklahoma's still a top 15 team, very good team. But you were right. They had an opportunity to run the table here. And Lincoln Riley is a gifted play caller, but you got to decide on who your quarterback is, and let's say like it is. Spencer Radler, I'm willing to bet, will not be in Norman next year because
No.
why would you go back to a squad that benched you, put you back in, and then benched you again? And for Lincoln Riley, you have a 5-star Caleb Williams who is talented. The offense obviously looks better with him at the helm. He's going to have growing pains as a young guy, so you have to ride with him. I think Spencer Radler's going to be gone. He hasn't played bad. He's still a...
Yeah, there will be a market for him, for sure.
Definitely, and I've been saying all along, I think Ole Miss would fit in for him because Matt Corral,
Yeah, Lane Kiffin's a great coach.
Yeah, and Lane Kiffin is a really good coach, and he's got some really good play design. So having a talented guy go to Ole Miss, I definitely think Ole Miss will be in the running for the Spencer Radler race if they don't get Arch Manning, which, we'll see what happens because Arch Manning could play as a true freshman, but I think Spencer Radler could end up in Ole Miss.
Yeah, and going back to what we were talking about with the Big 12, I think that's why Oklahoma was really supposed to be the team to carry that conference. And they've been a good conference, but it hasn't been the teams we expected. Iowa State has taken a big step back despite bringing back almost everyone. Texas is definitely not back.
Especially after losing to Kansas.
Yeah, a first-year head coach is not an excuse for losing to Kansas. And so the Big 12, in a way, they've had some teams exceed expectations, but they've also had some of their best teams be disappointing, or the teams that were supposed to be their best teams coming into the year. And so I feel like it's kind of like it's a net zero for them overall because you have some teams overperform, some teams underperform. I think they still kind of are what we thought they would be going into the season.
Do you think that the fact that they're moving to the SEC has any... Do you think that the outside noise of moving to the SEC has created a lot of distractions for the squad?
I don't think for the players because the players, they won't be there by the time that move is finalized. I think that there might be more pressure in the last season. Like, if we can't beat Arkansas, if we're Texas, we really need to get our crap together. But I don't know. I think that you can always make excuses, but this is what Texas has been for the last decade. They've been a school with all the talent, and they've just, for whatever reason, haven't been able to put it together. And it's not just one coach. It's been several coaches. And so I don't know if the problems run deeper than that. I don't know exactly how they would. I don't know how the athletic director could change that. But it's just they've been a very frustrating team to watch for the last few years.
Yeah, Lincoln Riley, he's a really good coach. He'll go to the NFL at some point, I think. He's just really good. I think Steve Sarkisian is the guy in Texas. Now, will he win them a national championship? I mean, it's his first year. It's hard to say, right? But Texas, they're the richest team in all of college football. They get all the star recruits. They're in a state in which...
Great talent pool in Texas.
Texas may be the most talented place to go get a football player from. I mean, Iowa, Ohio, those are some really blue blood places. California to me is more of like you get the quarterbacks, the wide receivers from there. But if you want some gritty offensive linemen and defensive linemen, you find them in the Midwest. But Texas, that's a culmination of everything: warm weather and tough football. If you can't win in the state of Texas, people are going to be mad.
Yeah, and that's the other thing is they haven't even been dominating their state as of late. You talk about Texas A&M; they've been a lot better these last few seasons. But then, UTSA. I'm not saying UTSA is coming for Texas's spot, but it's like that's what we're talking about. You have this mid-major school that's coming in and they're winning games, and you can't.
Yeah, and UTSA has played some. They're still playing non-Power 5 schools, but they've played really well against those schools and. I myself have gotten onto the UTSA Roadrunner bandwagon. I like them. I think they've got a shot at playing some really good football down the stretch. But you're right. Texas has been very disappointing basically since they won the 2001 Rose Bowl.
Yeah, so my last question for you then. If Texas played UTSA today, who would you pick?
I mean, it would really be hard to go against Texas.
That's what I'm saying.
But UTSA is a really good squad with a really solid quarterback in Frank Harris. They've got a good defense. They lost to Kansas, and UTSA is far and away better than Kansas. It wouldn't be a blowout, but if UTSA were able to pull it out, I wouldn't be shocked.
And I think you also think about momentum as well, where UTSA, they're this hot team. They weren't expected to do much. These players are as confident as they've ever been. And Texas, on the other hand, they come into every season with these sky-high expectations. And at this point, it's probably hard for them where they thought they were going to fight for a conference championship. They're fighting to stay bowl eligible.
Yeah, Hudson Card came in. I think he was a 4-star or 5-star quarterback. It was a little disappointing. They went to Casey Thompson. He had flashes, but he hasn't been the guy they thought. And they have been, when we're done with this season, we'll talk about most disappointing teams. They definitely have to be in the conversation because they have so much talent, especially on the offensive side with 5 stars literally everywhere, and it just didn't come together for some reason. We'll dissect into it a little bit more, but Kansas sucks. They beat Texas, so where does that put Kansas in the hierarchy of the Big 12? Does that put them above Texas because they beat them?
It was what was it, a 19-game conference road losing streak or something like that they snapped? I don't know. I was rooting for them to get on track. They had Les Miles there. He had to leave for some reasons that weren't really related to football, but I don't know. The good thing for Kansas is when you hit rock bottom, the only way is up. But the problem is they've been on rock bottom for about a decade. It's been all downhill since 2007.
Yeah, I mean they were a really good squad. I mean, Aqib Talib came
Chris
from
Harris
there.
Jr.
Chris Harris Jr.
They were on the same team.
So yeah, I mean they had some. They were a powerhouse, and they just turned
for
out
1 year.
Well, no, they turned out NFL talent like it was nobody's business, and well, Kansas. We'll just say they
have basketball.
They have basketball. I think they're number 3 in the nation right now, so you can count on that. Evan will be back soon rather than later, hopefully. A little inconsistent with the uploads, but we'll try and get better at that. You've been listening to the Aces Let's Do It podcast. That's been Evan Bruner. My name is Dominic Archer. I hope to see you next time.